Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm talking to Gene Zannetti. Gene is a nationally ranked all Ivy League wrestler who owns a sports psychology consulting business helping athletes and business people get the mental edge by overcoming mental blocks. And he's on a mission to use sports as a vehicle to build mental skills and virtue for life. Gene, welcome to the pod, man.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Dude, I heard you live, and every point that you've made, I'm like, dude, those are either reflections that I've had or things that I say, or even the ethos of this podcast. So it's an honor to have you on, man.
I appreciate you having me. Yeah, my whole life as a wrestler, I played sports all growing up, baseball, football, and wrestling, but it was wrestling that fascinated me the most, that one-on-one aspect that you could be as good as you want to be. I didn't like, and goes for me and both of my younger brothers, the youngest who actually became a priest. But it's like in team sports, you could be slowed down by your team. And maybe this is also what drew me to be an entrepreneur as a business owner, that you could be as good as you want to be. By the grace of God, of course, and no man is an island, right? Everyone needs a support system and a team, and you have to have good people on your team. But you have greater control of your destiny when you're steering the ship. And that's what I liked about wrestling. Plus, I can never sit still.
That's hilarious, man. Let's talk about that. I had an interesting conversation with an entrepreneur. He went solo recently, so he left the corporate world, started his own solo consulting practice. He started the whole grind. It could be difficult in the beginning. Tell me, there's a fine line between what you can control and what you can't control. How do you really hone in, either with your athletes or with yourself, the things that you can control? And it takes a level of responsibility. I want to get your take on what we can control, how to address that, and how to hit that head on.
It's a difficult balance because we have these paradoxes going on, right? We have to control every single thing we can control. And then the things that we can't control, we just need to let them go. That's tough to do when you're in the mentality of control everything. There's some people who do a very good job of controlling all the little things, but they're horrible at letting go. On the other hand, there's people who are the flip side. They're very good at letting things roll off, but they don't control things. So striking that balance, and I've been thinking about this a lot. It's not just striking a balance. A lot of times it's finding that optimal point. And sometimes that optimal point might be much more like control every single thing, and like leaning much more into that. And then on other times, you got to lean more towards letting go. So I guess that maybe that all sounds theoretical. The way we look at it, everyone in the world, all managers, coaches, teachers, great leaders always say, focus on what you could control. Forget about what you can't control. We've all heard that 1,000 times. That's not new news, especially in a post-COVID world. But how do we get that message to stick? Why are humans so notoriously bad at focusing on what they can control, forgetting what they can't? So one of the things we do in my sports psychology business, Wrestling Mindset, which I started, we work with all sports. Wrestling's our bread and butter, but we've worked with Fortune 500 companies, Northwestern Mutual, Mass Mutual. We worked at the Huntington Learning Center, San Francisco Conservatory of Music, all sports, about 30 UFC fighters, the Olympic team. But again, we were wrestlers, so that's the majority of our clients are there. We talk about the predator mindset. You look in the animal kingdom, there's predator and there's prey. And how can you tell the difference between a predator and a prey? Just by looking at them. For mammals, it's their eyes. So if you look at the predators, the lions, the tigers, the bears, oh my, their eyes are located on the front of their head because they're focused on what's in front of them and what they want. So we say eyes on the front like to hunt. And then the prey animals, squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, deer. I don't know if we have any hunters that watch, but their eyes are on the side of their head. So they're focused on what's going on around them because they don't want to get eaten. So just like we say eyes on the front like to hunt, we say eyes on the side like to hide. And that becomes a way to get this message to stick a little bit more with some more vivid mental imagery. I want to be like a lion. I don't want to be like the gazelle, right? I want to be the predator. I don't want to be the prey. So it's never to be taken literally, this language. It's a symbol. It's symbolic that we want to have a predator mindset. That means control the controllables. Prey mindset is the things outside of our control. And I found that high performers in sports, basically the happiest people in the world, the holiest people in the world, and the most successful people in the world all share that in common. They do a very good job at being able to parse the two, controlling the things they can control, forgetting about the things they can't. So that's, like I said, that's just a metaphor for life. So that predator mindset, and we could dive into each one of these, of course, but just to give you a brief overview, I consider the predator mindset, the things we can control are preparation and our lifestyle. That's ongoing, basically 24/7. And then in those performance moments, whether it's a competition, job interview, sales call, now your preparation and your lifestyle is basically whatever it is. And now
Mhm.
you can only focus on your effort, your attitude, and your aggressiveness. In sports, I
Okay.
say aggressiveness. In business, I might call it being tactfully tenacious. But it's basically the same thing. You're going after it as opposed to hanging back. You're erring on the side of going for it. Now, the prey mindset is focusing on everything outside of my control. What do other people think about me? I want to look good in front of other people, or I don't want to
Mhm.
look bad in front of other people. It's focusing too much on the outcome. Did I win? Did I lose? Did I get the sale?
Mm. Okay.
You're asking the person on a date, do they like me? Am I attractive in their eyes? Right? It's all others oriented.
Mm.
And again, there's a healthy balance. Like we can be aware of what other people are thinking. It's okay to want to win the approval of others, but that can't be our primary driver. So there's nuances even within that. But we don't want to be too focused on the outcome. We could set goals. That's very important. But on a day-to-day basis, you should be focusing on executing your action plan as opposed to, I got to achieve my goal. I got to achieve my goal. You
Mm.
don't need to hear that over and over. You need to focus on the steps to get you there, that roadmap to success. When we compare ourselves to other people, why are they married and I'm not? I am married, but we'll say this. Why is he tall? I'm not. Why we started our business at the same time? Why is their business more successful? That's prey mindset because I'm comparing myself to other people in a
Mm.
very not productive way. I could
Yeah.
compare myself to others in a productive way, but a lot of times when we do it, it's unproductive. So that's just a brief overview of that predator and prey mindset, which is really nothing more than saying, focus on what you could control, forget about what you can't control. I'm sure that there's a lot to unpack there. That could be a 2-hour conversation if you wanted it to be.
Yeah, no, to be honest with you, it could be. The interesting point here that I want to dive deep here are the way that I focus with clients and our businesses, like tactfully, are leading indicators. Here's the things that we can control and focus on. The thing that you're pouring into that is like I'm calling it like the liquid, like because it pours in between the cracks of the hard edges of
Mhm.
KPIs. Here's what we can do. Here's our leading indicators. Here's like our daily like the things that we focus on. But I think here you're taking into account, which I want to dive into, the daily human aspect of struggle, difficulty, self doubt, weakness, tiredness, fatigue, not hitting our goals or our daily actions. So that's part of life. Like the
Right.
plan is perfect when you set it, but when you go do it, you're like, oh, like it didn't work out perfectly because nothing always works out 100% perfectly as planned. There's always adjustments, always like life hits it. So I'm curious to embed both of those philosophies around business and exercise and or athleticism. Obviously, like I'm not a professional athlete. I'm like an amateur here, the body, like weightlifting, but now training for an Ironman, like a 70.3. So tell me how we can, because we're all one person. Our mind is not separate from our body and our body's not separate from our mind. So how you show up at work is how you show up at the gym. But how do we take that same energy? Because when I did it in an international triathlon 2 weeks ago. That was freaking fun. But it's also that was the performance, and the training was like the months that led up to it. But at work, I'm not gonna come here power through a 90-minute session of something. Like it's a different way of showing up. So I want the personal, like for me to know. But how do you train the body to show up the same way at work as it can into a sport? But then also, as we dive into that, what are some of the habitual practices that you work on with your athletes and or your business people around how to practice focusing on the predator mindset and not the prey?
Right. So with our mindset program, that predator prey mindset, that's an exercise in and of itself, but it's mostly a framework, a
Mm.
lens from which to view all of this. So with sports psychology, we give our clients different mindset exercises, right? They're putting the pen to paper, they're doing the worksheets. We break them into different mental muscles. Now, when we're going into the nitty gritty, that's the meat and the potatoes,
Mm.
right? So that's not just as simple as, oh, we have a cute analogy there that people could relate to. Now you're actually putting in the work to to get motivated, right? Like motivation would be an example of one mental muscle. Confidence would be another. Relaxing under pressure would be another one. Staying in the present moment. Mental toughness, aggressiveness, being tactfully tenacious. Each one of those is the way we look at it is a different mental muscle. Now, of course, there's some overlap there, right? They're not mutually exclusive. It's just helpful to break it down to get a little bit of a grip on our mind and how to conceptualize all this, right? So once you're doing the mindset exercises, that's when you're putting the pen to paper and you're improving those different areas. So it helps to pinpoint what exactly am I looking to do? And that predator and prey mindset provides a general framework from which to be doing all of this, if that makes
Mm.
sense. That's like my perspective overall, that predator and prey. It just makes it maybe not the overall like life ontological perspective, like the faith and morals, but it gives us a good way of looking at things in terms of slicing or making sense of how we think. In terms of, as you were saying now, what are we saying really more like the staying motivated, the being
Or
able to
just
bring
the
out my
habitual
best?
practices. So the two questions, it was like a two-part question is number one, how do you take that same energy that you do, like when, for example, for my example, do the triathlon into work? Because it's different. I'm literally in front of a screen. There's no danger in front of me. It's easy. It's quote unquote easy. It's just mental work. And it's a silly screen. It's not like I'm in the water or like I'm down on a bike. So that's the first
Right.
question. Then the second question around that is what are the habits that you work with your athletes and or business people to continue that, I don't know, that frame of mind?
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like a motivate. If I had to bracket this inside one mental muscle, which I know there's always a lot going on, I think I'm looking at it in terms of motivation, right?
Okay.
And so motivation, there's a few things with motivation, but the one point is what is the root word of motivation? And that's motive. What are our
Mm,
motives for action? So we know that our motives are basically desiring the good, desiring some outcome that's pleasurable in some way, not necessarily physically pleasurable, but desiring the good and avoiding the evil,
mm,
getting away from pain. So those are the two drivers really for all of our every action we take, every decision we make is how am I moving towards the good, towards something that I want, and how am I avoiding things that I don't want, right? The bad. So a lot of times, so it's both. So mindset becomes remove the negatives and and maybe it's not removing the negatives, sometimes just thinking differently about the negatives instead of looking at it as a problem. No, it's not a problem, it's a challenge. That's a
mm.
very simple word change you could make in your head that it's you didn't really change anything physically, but what you did is you reframed it. Right? People don't like problems, people like challenges. But really it's the same thing. You're overcoming some kind of obstacle. It's just how you're looking at it.
Hmm.
Even when we use someone goes to the doctor says, "Oh, someone's responding to treatment." That's a good thing, right? What if they say he's reacting to the treatment? Usually a
That's
bad
negative.
thing,
Yep.
right? Well, but it's basically the same. Some kind of change is happening, but it's like when we use the words, I don't want to react. I want to respond in work. That's again a small change we can make. Instead of using the word worry, like I'm not going to worry about this part of my business. I'm going to worry about that part of my business. No, don't worry about anything. The Bible says don't worry about anything. So instead, what do we focus on? You could take out the word focus from your vocabulary and switch it to take out the word worry and switch it to focus. And you really don't have to use that word again. I'm not going to focus on this right now in my business. I'm going to focus on that. So now that's a much more superficial like mindset exercise, but it's incredibly helpful because the words we use tend to be the first link in the chain of how things go. Our words impact our thoughts impact our behaviors impact our destiny. So the way I speak to myself consciously is going to start feeding that unconscious mind as well, right? That's a practical thing. That's maybe even more superficial, but it still has a big impact. Then also just being aware of how that pleasure and pain is working inside of me.
Mm,
If I don't want to pick up, let's say we're doing sales calls. Okay. If I'm thinking about the pleasure of and pleasure, I'm using that, not like I said, in a much more broad sense, right?
yeah,
The
it's desiring
good.
the good. Yeah.
Exactly. So if I'm thinking about, okay, okay, the obvious is I can make money if I close the sale. I could help change someone's life with my product if I make that sale. I could help this person be a better person. I like people. I like interacting with people. If I'm thinking like that, I'm getting the pleasure to work for me and it's making me more, it's giving me that motive, right? Motive is
Mm,
gain the pleasure, avoid the pain. I'm building that motive to make the call. On the other hand, pleasure could also be working against me too, because you know what? It would be easier for me to pick up my theology book right now. And I like to read a book right now. And everything also is pretty calm. Sometimes when I get on the phone, I might get on with an annoying prospect. It might be frustrating. It might go a lot longer than I want. So now you could start here. It's not just the pleasure, it's also the pain that starts to come in.
mm,
So the pleasure and the pain in and of themselves aren't bad. They're just part of the motives for action. Like I could use pain to work for me too. I could say if I don't make these calls, I'm not going to hit my goals. I'm going to know deep down when I look at myself in the mirror, I didn't give my very best. I'm going to be maybe in some ways letting my family down. I'm not setting a good example for my kids. If I work from home and they see me just hanging out, that's not setting a good example for them in terms of work ethic. So now I could make pain, once pain and pleasure are the drivers, you could make them work for you or against you in any way. That requires some thinking. You have to actually sit
yep.
down with that. And it's helpful to write it out on paper. What are my current pleasure and pain hooks in relation to something? And then if I
Mm,
want to change the behavior, how can I have new and empowering pleasure and pain hooks towards that? Let's say McDonald's. When I became a personal trainer years ago, I'm not doing that. But when I was doing that, a lot of the personal trainers would say, "Oh, McDonald's is disgusting." And I'm like, "I'm not like you there. I loved McDonald's when I was a kid. I'd love McDonald's right now. I don't think it's disgusting. I get it that it's not nutritional, but I would love to have a double quarter pounder with cheese right now and the fries, large fry. If I'm thinking about the taste, that's going to help drive me in that direction. If I think about the pain of, oh, I got to eat this salad and chicken when I could eat McDonald's, there's pain associated with that.
mm,
Instead, I want to get the pleasure and pain working for me. Okay, the pain, but it tastes good for a second. It's like a moment on the lips, lifetime in the hips, as I would tell the people in the group fitness class. Or you eat it, but then there's what? Insulin spike, carbo crash. You're all mentally weirded out for the next hour and a half. So I'm building up the pain there. And then what about the pleasure of making the good decision, making the
mm.
conscious decision to eat well? We could delight properly in that virtue. Like I made a good decision there. I feel good about that. I have more energy. So making pain and pleasure work for you. I know we're diving into both, but I wanted to
This is
give you
good.
I wanted to give you one example of simple word changes you could make that are incredibly practical, and then diving into the more deeply like psychological hooks that are that are drivers of basically all of this. Those are
I
just a
think
couple examples.
no, and it's simple enough and they're wonderful, but it's really complex, like, when you go deep into it. But I think the a key takeaway here is for whatever you're going through right now, whatever you think are behaviors that you know you need to change, but you're not changing them, they're not happening. I think going through this exercise, just writing down that behavior in the title and then going through, why am I doing this? What am I gaining from this that I love or feel or like it makes it feel comfortable? But what am I actually losing from this? And then doing the flip, how can you use the pain to motivate you? And again, working towards some greater good. Now, the question here is it begs the question of willpower, right? Okay, let's use your example of the salad. Okay, the salad is great, it's better for me. I'm gonna have longevity of life, and probably have lower cholesterol, whatever. Okay, great. But then you still have to have that energy. So do you believe in willpower? Is the willpower something that's part of us, part of the motive, part of the execution, or is it something that you don't have to have willpower if you've conditioned your mind to just seek the good?
It's part of being human, right? Living in a fallen world. Obviously, a lot of times our desires are raging against us, and
Mm,
there's the temptation, our appetites that are working against us. It gets easier. It definitely gets easier once you build a habit. Like we know, I don't always feel like exercising, right? But because it's been a part of my life for so long, if I don't exercise for a day or two, okay, maybe a day be okay. 2 or 3 days, I'm starting to feel crummy. Why? For a lot of people, it feels crummy to exercise, period, because you built a habit. So now it's become more part of you. So there's still a willpower there because you don't always feel like exercising. And it's the same thing our eating, with our executing our action plan at work and our career. There's something real about that momentum and good habits. So our habits end up forming us for better and for worse.
mm,
So we really want to keep an eye out on what are our current habits and what habits do I need. I don't want to say need, and not I have to do this, but I get to do this. Instead of using the word should, have to, must, need to, ought to, gotta, instead it's better to use words like I want to, I get to, I choose to. You don't have to. All you have to do is pay taxes and die. You don't even have to pay the tax. You can just go to jail. So the point is there's very few things you actually have to do. You remind yourself that you get to do it. So I think that's also helpful to look at it that way too.
yeah, and I think what you're really hitting at is the development of virtue through that action, and
Yes.
over time, that virtue becomes like the backbone of your behaviors. And we used the
Yep.
word behavior earlier. Look at the behaviors you don't like, but I think deeper would look at the habits because
Yes.
those behaviors done over a period of time, even if it's 4 days, is a habit.
Exactly. And we find it takes in order to really start getting a habit really built. What I heard was it takes between 21 and 28 days. So
Mm,
what does that tell you? That means those first 21 to 28 days might be a lot painful. At very least, maybe not painful, but very uncomfortable. And we have to have the willingness to push through it. And that might be where you need to do things to get yourself more motivated, like you were saying, even with work. So with motivation, there's two words that are commonly associated with that: enthusiasm and excitement, right? Enthusiasm, en, that's a prefix, right? We're getting into English here. That means from within.
mm,
Enthusiasm, it's coming from within. And then there's excitement, ex. That means from without, from the outside coming in. So we want to have both of those, right? So we need to work on building enthusiasm within ourselves, but at times it's helpful to have the excitement coming from the outside, right? So having the goal setting and
Yeah.
our short-term goals, our long-term goals. And more importantly than the goal is the why, way more important than your goal is why do you want to have this? And hopefully it's ultimately ordering you towards the ultimate destination, right? Ultimately towards God. But even at a natural level, that like it's got to go through to there and having a higher purpose. Even you say like a doctor who just wants to, they want to be a doctor to make a lot of money. They're probably not going to do as well as the doctor who's really trying to save lives and improve people's overall health. Even if the one person does end up making more money, who do you ultimately want to see? You want to see this, right? You want to see the person who's trying to change lives. So really examining our why. Why do we want this? So that's like from within. And then from the outside, then we have our motivation buttons, if you want to call them. So this is where it gets the other one is like the more soul searching. What do I really want and why? Takes a little bit of time, right? Then from the outside, it's maybe a little bit easier, but you want to plan that out too. Like we all have buttons, if you want to call them that. Pet peeves. We all have things that make us mad, that aggravate us, right? We also have motivational buttons. What are certain things that happen that make us motivated? There's different buttons that make us happy, that make us sad, that make us motivated. So what you want to do is you want to identify what has worked for you in the past and what else do you think might work for you? Songs, little YouTube video clips. It could be pictures or images. And then that's like the excitement from the outside. That's why at a lot of gyms, motivational posters, you have motivational playlists. It's like, it's more like superficial in the sense that it's coming from the outside, but it still helps you if it helps push you. One other point I want to make back to what you were saying before about the difference between maybe running an marathon, an Ironman versus maybe coming to work. It's a different thing. And I don't think you need to feel, you don't need to feel like there's something wrong. You or any of us, right? I don't get the same feel when I work or when I make a sales call as I do before I would take the mat to wrestle. That's okay. Like we don't have to feel, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing necessarily, like I think that's important to know. There's nothing deficient in us. It's just a different thing. One, it's thrilling in a way that work isn't, but we can find other ways which work is fulfilling. That is not either.
Yeah.
That the marathon or the Ironman or my wrestling match in the past would have been. So just an important point.
No, I think that's important in terms of not comparing the two, but also seeing, I think using the words that you mentioned, like how do I see the work differently in an approach? Because I think that the competition is the reward of the training. Like that in itself, it's there, but like, what is the reward here? Just to switch gears, and before we close, it probably won't be substantially different from a lot of the things that we know, just top of mind, but I'd be very curious to see what are you seeing either with your athletes or your private clients? What are some of the common bigger struggles that we're facing now? Post-pandemic, is there a common themes that people are getting blocked from, or issues that you're having people to work through, or different types of mental models or exercises that people need more of nowadays than they did in the past? Like, are you seeing any trends on your end?
Number one, speaking spiritually, number one, these are these are still more evergreen topics, right?
Okay.
This would have been just as true before the pandemic. In some ways, things have gotten worse. So I think we have to have our eyes on the big picture. That's why I always say, you know, my Catholic faith is very important to me. And looking at what is, why is it that we do the things that we do? What's the ultimate purpose? So that's huge, right? And when I look at the lowest of the lows, when I would study in psychology, like suicide, right? I don't take that lightly. Two of the, there's 8 or 9 warning signs of suicide. Point is this, those are not on equal ground. 2 of those are causative and the other ones are effects. Purposelessness and hopelessness are at the root. Those are causes. Mood change, anger, appetite change, those are more effects. The cause is purposelessness and hopelessness. You take away God, you take away faith, where's your purpose? Where's your hope? And you can have like a surface level purpose or hope, but if it's not ultimately rooted in something that's unchangeable, you're on very rocky ground because you could change your mind one day to the next day and you realize that. As a human, you realize, okay, that's not very stable. If I'm making up my own meaning, my meaning could change. What good is that? I want something that's fixed, that's decided, that won't change. I want to be built solid on a rock. So we need to have purpose and hope. And that's what ultimately faith gives us, right? And then number 2, I would still have to say the predator-prey mindset that we spoke about, because that is a big thing that still gets people in terms of what do we control? What can we actually control? And maybe an offshoot of that would be like an entitlement, right? And an excuse making, a natural tendency for people to criticize, blame, complain, point the finger. I would still lump that into prey mindset for simplicity.
Yeah.
Putting the responsibility on myself. I need to suck it up and get tough. And no, I can't do it alone. I need God's help, but I can't be pointing the finger at other people. I can't be
Yeah.
saying it's your problem. It's your problem. It's on me. I need to take personal responsibility, which is huge. So I think that a lot of times also is a big thing that slows people down. We do have to learn to offer it up and get tough. Sometimes that means being a little bit hard on ourselves. Two things. You have to be simultaneously your best friend and your harshest critic. Not easy to do.
Yeah. I think
Not
most
easy.
of the people have the harshest critic on, at least I do most of the time.
I don't know if most people, I don't know. Because I feel like there's some people who do a really good job being their harshest critic. They're horrible at being their best friend. There's other
Yeah.
people who are very easy on themselves and they're not their heart and
Oh,
they
maybe
need to
you're
be
right.
harder on themselves. And so it's again, not just balance, but finding that optimal point. If you're having a bad day, business didn't go well, in wrestling, it's like you're cutting weight, you lost a match. And then when you think things couldn't get any worse, you found out your girlfriend ran off and left you for the drummer. You're having a bad day. Probably not a good day to be your harshest critic. Probably
Yeah.
a good day to be your own best friend. And then at other times where you're feeling a little either tired, bored, lazy, or peer pressured to compromising either faith and morals or the path to success, your action plan, that's the time where you need to be a little bit harder on yourself and say, no, it's time to get tough. I got to throttle down, suck it up and get tough. You could do this. It's being both best friend and harshest critic. So I think that's all played now with what people need to see. Because I do think the generations are getting softer, and I'm sure they have been for a while. I'm sure our generation was probably softer than the one that came
Oh,
before
yeah.
us. So we just need to keep that in our head and that predator mindset. Focus on what I could control. We'll offer it
I
up
love
and get
that.
tough.
I love that, man. The beautiful dichotomy there. Gene, for everyone listening here, was the best place for people to win. Thank you for being on, and check out more what you're up to. Well,
Go to wrestlingmindset.com.
we'll put
Thank
that on, man. I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get more of these podcasts, please go ahead and subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to the pod. If you have any suggestions or questions that you want me to answer on the pod, or you have a guest that you want me to interview, please go ahead and email me all of your suggestions and questions at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. If you'd like to give me public feedback, you can go on Apple Podcasts, and from there you can leave up to a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like more free resources where you can get my best strategies to help you increase your company's performance and scale profitably, you can get handpicked articles to propel your growth, and you can get trainings and discussions that I give freely online, as well as low-cost resources such as my books and guides. You can get all of that by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. 90% of all of these resources are not behind any email opt-ins. You can get instant access by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. Now, if you'd like to accelerate your progress and shorten the gap between information and action and start seeing results in your business, let's work together to increase your company's performance and scale profitably and serve more clients without the overwhelm. You can request a free clarity call to see how we can best support you to reach your goals by going to dogoodwork.io/apply. Again, that's dogoodwork.io/apply. As always, it's an honor to be a small part in your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.